We're investing in the future of pot stocks here today, and it's going to be a fun one. You know, this is a very, very new asset class when you think about metals and equities and interest rates, stuff that's been around for centuries, that's been accessible for decades. This is a very, very new asset class that is growing kind of in tandem with cryptocurrencies, and there's a lot of crossover between these two new asset classes. We'll get into all of that, how you can access it, what might be a healthy way to add it to your portfolio or a healthy way to add it to your daily trading. A lot of day traders out there that are looking to just speculate on the back and forth in this new futures product. We're going to have a ton of fun. Before we can have fun, you must look at this disclosure that lays out all the risks and potential rewards, advantages, disadvantages of trading futures, stocks, and ETFs, and all that fun stuff. A lot of words. You can read them if you don't want to. I'm not going to tell anyone, but this is what we must look at before we can start looking at how you might grow your own pot. Now, we're going to be talking about different pot stocks and the new futures. We're going to be looking at charts, correlations, a ton of fun stuff. If you want to follow along while also looking at the product in your platform, go to go.smallexchange.com/S420. S420 is the base symbol for this product. We know it's fun. We're having a ball here at the Small Exchange with all our new products. But if you go to that website, you'll be able to get some basic information and some symbology and how to access the market, and you can definitely look at how it's trading while we are talking live in real time about historical prices and how you might trade it. It's 21 strains of pot stocks with small cannabis futures, a nice low-cost product that lets you speculate on the future growth in cannabis. So go to go.smallexchange.com/S420 to get information on accessing or at least looking at this product throughout the presentation. Also, don't forget to fill up the chat there. Any questions or comments throughout the presentation, we will get to them at the end. If you have questions on, how viable pot stocks are as an investment tool or day trading tool, or just questions on futures in general, we'd love to field all of them. This is one of those rare moments when we jump on live with our followers to ask any questions that they might have. Now, let's get to the agenda and get on with the presentation here. First, we're going to talk about why you might trade pot, why you might invest in it, why you might just add it to your watch list at the very least. A lot of fun stuff in there. And then we're also going to talk about the new product here and how that could fit into any ideas you might have about trading pot. And then finally, some practical use cases for it. We'll look at investing, we'll look at day trading, we'll look at pairs trading pot stocks. It's going to be a fun one here. Definitely hang out for this presentation. With that said, let's get into it. Why would you trade pot stocks? Well, for starters, cannabis companies currently reside at a huge inflection point. We're looking at the popular Tilray as a benchmark for today. And just so I could get, about more than half a decade worth of historical price data. And what you see here is a really, really interesting new market to me. It's one that for years kind of hung out at the lows, similar to some of your cryptocurrencies, your Bitcoins, not really appreciating, not gaining any favor yet. And then by 17 and 18 there, you see a big rise in demand for pot stocks. The prices shoot up, they move back lower, and then they regain some fashion here at the start of 2021. Right now, we rest at almost exactly the midpoint between the lows in pot stocks and the highs in pot stocks, which present a really intriguing inflection point, like I say, for anybody who might have an opinion. This is truly a moment where you ask yourself, are pot stocks going to be cool or are they not going to be cool? And then that will dictate, where you lie on this trade moving forward. It is nice to be in a market here. A lot of people, when we're at the highs, it's like, oh man, I wish I bought it. Now it's too high to buy it. If we're at the lows, there's this sentiment of like, oh, this thing is dead. It's never getting back. We're right there in the middle, and you can make a pretty, well-rounded, well-informed decision given all these historical prices with great expectations of where prices could get to on both the upside and the downside. without having to feel like, oh, if I wanted to buy it, we're at the highs, so I'm getting bad prices. Or if I wanted to sell it, this thing is already down to, a couple of bucks. I can't sell it this low. A nice inflection point that poses this classic question of, will pot stocks be cool moving forward? Now, at the very least, pot stocks do offer a great amount of diversification relative to the S&P 500. Here is the 3-month correlation going back for the last 5 years between the S420 index and what we have with just the SPY ETF. Now you see a good amount of green here on the board. Of course, these are at the end of the day stock products, so if things are good for stocks, then you'd expect the pot stocks to drift higher. If we're crashing, you'd expect these stocks to crash as well. But what I found really intriguing by this, and I was honestly very surprised by it, right now we're showing a correlation of positive 0.1 between the index and the S&P 500. That's very, very low, which isn't to say that's bad. I think a lot of people think, oh, low correlation, that means I shouldn't trade this thing. Quite the contrary, in an aspect like this, if you add pot stocks to a portfolio, if you're long stocks and you add a long position in pot stocks, you're short stocks, you add a short position in pot stocks, that's actually pretty decent diversification given that this is green correlations, but very low green correlations. I mean, they've topped out at just positive 0.5. When you're looking at tech stocks or energy stocks or some of these other major sectors, they're consistently at 0.6, 0.7, getting up to 0.8 at certain points. So a really nice diversified piece that you can feel good about. Oh, I've got a long stock portfolio. Adding some long pot stock to my portfolio is maybe a flyer. Maybe these pot stocks do take off at some point. And with the small cannabis futures, only $1,000 per contract there. Nothing that's necessarily going to break the bank for most traders. I can feel good about stocks zigging on a daily basis and this market zagging. It's a nice diversified piece, which is hard to find when you're creating products out of stocks. I always talk about jumping from SPY to QQQ to Dow Jones. All these major indices carry pretty much the same stocks. This is a truly diversified stock piece that should move differently than the rest of your stock portfolio. Now, this is another piece compared to the S&P 500 and other major equity indices that I think is really, really intriguing. And that's that pot stock volatility comes in usually at 2, 3, or even 4 times that of the S&P 500. I mean, looking at the 30-day expected range moving forward for Tilray, this is, if the stock is sitting at about 15 bucks, and the expected range is about $5 on either side. That is a huge range for a 30-day basis. And I know a lot of you out there are looking to scalp intraday or looking for maybe enhanced returns, larger moves, whether you're long or short, relative to what the market. We've seen a lot of inside days in the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow Jones. This is going to pack a little bit more of a punch, usually 2 or 3 times as much as the other stock market benchmarks, which is really nice for those inside days. If you've got, a 0.5% in the S&P and it's like, man, I got nothing to do with that. You'll usually see 1 or 1.5% in the pot stock asset class. This also moves on to potentially larger returns for buyers or sellers. We always pose that short side when we're talking about our products because futures make it so easy to get on the short side of any market here. And you can see, of course, Tilray in the last 6 years, continuing with Tilray as our benchmark here, it's up 2,000%, which is like, oh man, that's a great return. I should buy this thing and hope for another 2,000% in the next 7 years. But I mean, you see several occurrences whereby this market goes from, it gains hundreds of percentage points and then gives up all of it, buying and selling this market, yielding huge moves, especially in a time frame where we've seen pretty good action out of the equity market, depending on what index that you're looking at, up 30, 40, 50% in the last half a decade. nothing compared to some of the swings that we've been seeing in these pot stocks. So really intriguing when you have a market that has, doubled in price and been cut in half a few times. Almost every year you see these pot stocks either double or half themselves, which creates this great opportunity for buyers or sellers. Now let's get into why you should trade small cannabis futures themselves. A lot of background there on what pot stocks can offer as a diversified piece that has a lot of back and forth and a lot of potential in the way of returns. Why go to the futures? Hey, Frank, we've got single name pot stocks. We've got ETFs now at this point. Well, your stocks and ETFs are going to make you lock up 50 to 100% of your capital to buy them, and a lot of those pot stocks are hard to borrow, going to be hard to sell as well. You have here exposure to this asset class, 21 of those popular pot stocks. If you buy it, you have that long exposure in all 21 of them, and you're paying a fraction of the cost. We'll get into some tables here in a second, but it is quite literally paying, if you're used to paying 50% to buy a stock or ETF, you're going to be paying closer to 20% with these futures. I don't know who doesn't like a good deal, a lower requirement to buy or sell an asset class such as cannabis companies here. Now, moving forward, you're used to getting these good rates on equity indices like the E-minis, even the micro E-minis that are still over $20,000 in size. This is a very clean product. We talked about this a lot in the design phase of it. Do we want to go, 3,000, 4,000, up to 10,000 in size? We brought this thing all the way down to $1,000 product size. We thought that was a real sweet spot between something that has enough unique price points on any given day, is moving enough here. It's not that small that it's not moving at all, but it's also not so big that per contract you're risking more than $1,000. I mean, if this thing goes to zero, that's $1,000, which is not a small amount of money, but you'd be hard pressed to find another futures market that if you bought it and it went to zero, 1,000 is the losses. You've got most futures, traditional futures in the equity index space, ranging from 20,000 to 200,000. Some of them NASDAQ futures getting closer to 300,000 every day. This was a really nice piece for us. You get the smaller price point, the lower percentage you have to put up for a smaller product, just at $1,000. And also, now I'm sure a lot of you out there love the different pot stocks, Cron, ACB, Tilray, and on down the line, but I'm sure a lot of you have found that, I picked the wrong one, or this one is seeing a lot of upside today and this one hasn't moved. And of course, I ended up buying the one that hasn't moved. What's really nice about going to a bifurcated market like pot stocks, where any news that comes out in legalization could be good for these companies and not so good for those companies. Basketing them all together means that you're not missing out on any of the upside of one or a couple of them in particular, and you reduce the specific risk as well. I mean, that ACB has, in this time frame from the start of 2020 till now, been more than cut in half in the same time frame where Cron is up almost 20-30%. You don't want the specific risk of single name equities, especially in a new asset class like pot stocks that we have here, where any earnings announcement or any news can come out and potentially take one of these companies down, something to do with their CEOs or some shady business. Basketing them all together means that, of course, you'll get the exposure of those one-off moves in there, but it's moved down to 3 or 4 or 5% per stock, and so it's not overwhelming, and you don't have to just bet on one horse, so to speak, when you are giving an opinion on the future of pot stocks. Also, we have a very intriguing trade for the neutral traders out there as well. Unlike some of these equities, we see new highs in a few of these equity index futures almost every day. It seems we've seen a considerable amount of back and forth. And I know for those of you who have been long pot stocks, this maybe isn't so good of a story to tell, but you have a market that put in a new high to start the year here, and is now moved lower by a lot and has bounced back, and a lot of bouncing back and forth for those neutral traders just looking to trade price action. A truly unique opportunity in the same time frame where stocks have just been climbing higher and higher. You have this pot stock index bouncing back and forth and giving you something to trade that doesn't just trend higher necessarily. Now let's get into the context around this new product. Newest futures from the small exchange offer cannabis stocks at a lower cost product. That's really the big thing here. Is we both consolidated a lot of these pot stock companies, these cannabis companies, whatever you want to refer to them by, and we're giving you a more efficient rate to buy or sell them here. Small cannabis futures offer access to pot stocks in a penny tick increment that's worth $1, just like 100 shares of stock, but it's coming in at a lower capital requirement. Here are the 21 names in the small cannabis index. The futures that you trade on top of do hold $1,200 as of today, $1,200 of pot stock exposure spread across all 21 of these names for just $204 in initial margin from the exchange. Let's look at what exactly that means. And I'll leave this up for another second here. You can take a look. We have this on our small exchange website as well, but hopefully we have your favorite pot stocks in here. I know the Hexo is a popular one. OGI is a popular one. Tilray, of course, has been popular for a while. Mikey, what's your favorite one? Tilray. You went with the popular choice there. A lot of people liking that Tilray. Of course, we have it in here, and a few newcomers as well. But yeah, $1,200 worth of pot stock exposure for just $204. Can't beat that in any of your stock or ETF products there. Now, let's compare the looks and the cost of pot stock exposure across S420, the MJ ETF, Tilray stock, and Cron. One S420 contract is equal to around 100 shares of the most popular pot stocks and ETFs. You can see, 60 shares of MJ, 70 shares of Tilray, 140 of Cron. Nothing necessarily too big. When you start seeing like the E-mini S&P, for instance, like, oh, how many shares of SPY equals the E-mini S&P future? And it's like, thousands. As like, that might be a little too big. Coming in at just around 100 shares of most of these popular pot stocks, individual names, and ETFs, you know that it isn't necessarily that big of an endeavor to buy or sell one of the contracts. Now, this is where the futures efficiency really kicks in and really helps you out and really makes sense to make that jump from stocks and ETFs to futures derivatives. If I'm getting $1,200 worth of pot stock exposure, or 60 shares of MJ, or 70 shares of Tilray, or 140 of Cron, and I have to pay $600 for them in that single name stock or ETF world, but S420 gives me a lot of these names, those Tilray and Cron and a bunch of others, for just $204. Why would I go into the more expensive option? Now, of course, I make this note every time. This isn't to say, oh, well, now I can get $3,600 worth of pot stock exposure for $600, and I'm just going to lever up and just really get into this thing. That's never what we advocate for. But saving $400 to buy or sell your pot stocks, that is going to just make room for other things. Hey, now I can go dip into a US dollar position, or everybody's talking about rates. I have some money left over to trade some interest rates. Freeing up that capital allows you to further diversify, further reduce risk with options and so many other things. Saving 2/3 here to buy or sell pot stocks is truly innovative in and of itself. Now, how does this thing move? Well, we have here the bell curve for daily activity in the small cannabis index, which translates to the future. And you can see on a given day, 68% of the time, that's one standard deviation, we're moving about 35 cents, which is equivalent to, about $35 worth of movement in 100 shares of a $12 stock. I know that might seem confusing, but essentially what you have here is, 100 shares of a $12 stock that moves about 35 cents. And since it's times 100, that's about $35 on a daily basis. Now, of course, this is a market that is prone to outliers, and when those outliers hit, they tend to be big outliers. So you will see a dollar move in here from time to time, maybe even $1.50. What's really nice is that's only $100 or $150 on those outlier days. You know, if some legislation comes in concerning cannabis and its use throughout the United States, or one state in particular, then that outlier move on a per contract basis is still probably around $100 or $200. Don't have to worry about those outliers translating to thousands like they do in those traditional equity index futures. Also, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, looking into how you might invest in pot, it's nice to know, nice to have the context here, getting into the small cannabis index, that this market has been twice as high, and it's also been half of where it currently is. Sitting at around $12, you can see that the highs for this market are up near $25, like I say, about twice where we are right now. And also the lows as recent as the end of 2020, around $5 or $6. So truly that inflection point for you to ask the question, will pot get back to these prior heights? Is this just the start? I'm starting to see, you know, CBD oriented products in the grocery store more frequently. I think that that is a trend that's going to continue. I think that there's going to be further and further demand for recreational and medicinal cannabis products. I think that the legislation is only going to get more lenient on the production and distribution of these products throughout the United States and abroad. And thus, I want a buy order in S420 that could profit from the upside. Also, at the end of the day, these are stock companies, and we made sure that we didn't put any of these small pink sheet stocks in here. These are pretty well-founded, large market cap stocks here that you can just add diversification to your portfolio. Like I said earlier, you know, maybe selling, if you have shares of SPY, QQQ, and DIA, they're mainly in the same stocks. If you can free up some of that capital, buy a contract or two of S420, get $1,000 or $2,000 worth of pot stock exposure, goes a long way to diversifying that portfolio. Now, what's really, really cool, I think, but maybe a lot of people aren't as interested in, is you can also, just as easily as you can buy pot stocks and you know, potentially profit from upside, you could sell them. If you think that this market, you know, and its rise from 2015 until now is still overplayed. Now, of course, you're not getting those highs that we saw of 2018 and earlier this year, but, you know, still a market that, like we saw in Tilray from 2015 until now, still a market that's up thousands of percentage points. You could just as easily put in a sell order to potentially profit from downside. You think maybe this is the top, everybody is injecting CBD into their, you know, sodas and pancakes and everything else, and you think that that's a trend that's going to die out, and by the time we're in 2025 or 2030, we're going to be looking back and being like, oh yeah, that was kind of crazy that everybody for a couple of years there was putting CBD into everything, and it's not as intriguing anymore. You can go in there and sell the S420 futures. That's just $204 to gain $1,200 worth of short exposure and try to make a couple $100 there from potential downside. I mean, look at these swings. You've seen in this market a ton to be done on the up and the downside. For those of you out there similar to myself who have little to no opinion on cannabis and where it might go in the future, this is a great product in terms of volatility and trading price action. I mean, you look at this chart, and in the same time from, you know, the early part of 2020 until now, you have the major equity indices just climbing higher, you know, small sell-offs, but trending higher and higher and higher. You have a market here that has gotten down to $5, has gotten up to almost $20, and now is middling that market. That's a beautiful thing to have in terms of neutrally trading, just buying downside extremes, selling into huge rallies both on the up and downside, huge extremes of volatile market to apply technical analysis, or we at the small exchange output a ton of advanced stats, letting you know what the projected ranges are, what the standard deviations are, and when we get outside of that, a potential trade there in this small cannabis market. So definitely one ripe with opportunity for those looking to get long, short, or neutral. And that also goes for on a day trade basis as well. This is going to be an interesting one here. And we've really made a living out of giving people scalpable products that don't have to move thousands of dollars per day for you to find opportunity. I think that was the way that a lot of people have thought in the 2000s, the 2010s, which is like, oh, I need to reach up for this product that moves thousands of bucks per day and have these huge P&L swings. This product moves about 30 to 40 cents or 30 to 40 bucks on a daily basis, and you can feel with our low fees and low margin requirements and everything else, you can get a decent return scalping $20 or $30 on a daily basis. Even $10 is going to do you pretty well in the long run, given all of those low fees and low margins on this product. I mean, if you scalp $20 today in the S420 futures, that's a return of 10% relative to your margin, and the fees and everything else built into it are, I think, lower than 50 cents. Really, really manageable to get smaller with scalping. No more, I'm trading the CL futures or the ES futures, and I have to try to carve out just this $100 win or loss in a product that moves hundreds of dollars in any given minute. No, you can feel comfortable and still make long-term profits scalping 10, 20 bucks, and that's what this market is perfect for. I talked about this a little bit throughout the presentation, the fact that stocks have been trending higher. When you're looking at the major indices, we have SM75 up there in red against the black line of S420. Cannabis companies moving very differently from other equities, and this gives you a whole new set of opportunities for neutral trading, for adding stuff to your investment portfolio, everything on down the line. We're going to get to pairs trading here in a second. I always love to see a stock market here that is just bucking the trends of other major stock indices, because then I have something different. Like if we created a stock index that I plotted here in a black line against the SM75 that moved just give or take 50 cents or a dollar against that SM75, why the hell would we have created it? Like, you already have the thing that moves like that. It's a question that I ask people is like, why would you trade S&Ps and NASDAQ? They have, essentially the same stocks in there. You're getting essentially the same moves, give or take like a 10th or a 20th of a percentage point. Love that we created a truly unique equity product in here, and it creates a truly unique pairs trade as well. You can spread pot against the broad equity market and create another new trade that's not necessarily long or short stocks, but you just think that the general stock market is going to perform, worse than these pot stocks in the next couple of days, next couple weeks or months. You can buy 3 S420s, sell an SM75. You think that pot stocks are going to, underperform the larger equity market in whatever time frame? You can sell 3 S420s and buy an SM75, another new pairs trade. We here at the Small Exchange love our spreads and our pairs trades. A new one for you here that, as you can see, looking at that y-axis, is a volatile one. Going to be interesting divergences and convergences on a daily basis. I mean, this is a spread that in the early part of 2021 got down to negative 35 or 40 points, came all the way back to negative 20. I mean, that is a huge move that you don't see in divergences between the Dow and the S&P, too tightly knit there. This is going to be a real interesting pairs trade to have on our board. And with that being said, just want to call out the rest of the smalls that make futures trading more accessible to more people. Don't forget about our small stocks futures, our small metals, US dollar, technology, and yields. oh man, are we moving in just about everything except for that stock market. Yields all over the place, a ton of back and forth in there. We have the 2-year yield is doubled in the last week here. We've got US dollar up considerably, new heights that they haven't seen in months. Metals getting absolutely annihilated in the last week, though a nice little bounce here today. A ton of fun stuff going on here at the smalls. We're so happy to be adding new products like this small cannabis right on the heels of adding our small crude oil product. That's another intriguing one. Like I say at the beginning of this presentation, new highs in crude oil earlier today. Really intriguing piece to add to your portfolio, to your just toolbox of day trades, whatever you want to do with the futures. Nice small futures in almost every asset class, giving you efficient margining on small product sizes. With that, I will close today's presentation on investing in the future of pot stocks with small cannabis futures.